In this video, I'll introduce dependency relations. I'll talk about different components of dependency relations and some common dependency tree banks, and then I'll discuss many of the dependency roles from the Universal Dependency Tag Set in more detail with some examples. Dependency relations have two components: a head, which governs the dependency, and a dependent, which serves to modify or depend upon the head in some way. A given dependency relation describes the dependent's role with respect to its head. For example, it might be serving as its subject, as its direct object, or as its indirect object. Although dependency relation types in English often correlate with sentence position and constituent type, this is by no means a requirement. In other languages where the order of words is less closely tied to meaning, the information encoded by dependency relation types often cannot be directly estimated from constituency trees, and even in English, it's error-prone to rely on that as a heuristic. We saw previously that with constituency grammars and part-of-speech tags, there are a variety of labeling taxonomies that can be applied to words and phrases. This is also the case with dependency grammars, and these labeling taxonomies are generally referred to as dependency tree banks. A few of the most popular dependency tree banks include the Stanford dependencies, the Connell dependencies, and the Universal dependencies. Dependency tree banks are time-consuming to create, and just like constituent tree banks are, to build them you need to have human annotators manually create gold standard dependency parses for sentences, or at best, you can have them manually edit automatically created parses. In recent years, the most popular dependency tag set has been the set of universal dependencies, and most off-the-shelf dependency parsers will now use these tags as their default output format. Universal dependencies can be broken down into two subsets: the set of clausal relations, which loosely correspond to the parts of the sentence that refer to the subject, and the set of modifier relations, which loosely correspond to the parts of the sentence that modify the headwords of other relations. Clausal relations form the core of the sentence and convey the key information, whereas modifier relations are what make the sentence interesting. You can see some examples of clausal relations here, with the nominal subject I for the headword prefer, and the direct object mask for the headword prefer. The arrows point from the head to the dependent. You can see some examples of modifier relations here, again with the arrows pointing from the head to the dependent. So for example, we have the determiner the, modifying the headword mask, and the adjective purple also modifying the word mask. I'll cover a lot of these dependency relations in more detail now. Here you can see the core group of dependency relations from the Universal Dependency Tag Set divided into different categories. Given a dependency relation where you have a headword and a dependent, the rows in this table correspond to those dependents' functional categories with respect to the headword. So some dependents are acting as core arguments of clausal predicates, some are acting as non-core dependents of clausal predicates, and some are acting as dependents of nominals. The columns in this table correspond to the different possible structural categories of the dependent. So some dependents are nominals, some are clauses, some are modifier words, and some are function words. So in the top left quadrant, we have dependency relations where the dependent is a nominal that functions as a core argument of a clausal predicate. These dependencies are the core types of relations that you're probably already well aware of, things like nominal subjects, direct objects, and indirect objects. Below that category, we have nominals that function as non-core dependents of clausal predicates. These are less obvious dependency relations. Oblique nominals are nominals that still act as arguments of the headword, but more so in an adverbial role. Vocatives mark dialogue participants, and expletives act as arguments but don't satisfy any of the predicate's semantic roles. For example, the existential there, like there is currently a pandemic, would be an example of an expletive. Dislocated dependencies don't really occur in standard English, but would be something like dissertation in the example sentence. They follow the word that is being modified and sort of introduce or reiterate the topic. And then we have nominals that act as the dependents of other nominals. This group of dependencies includes some pretty common relations, such as nominal modifiers, appositional modifiers, and numeric modifiers. Moving over to the right in our table, we start out with clauses that act as core arguments of clausal predicates. This is a pretty common group of dependency relations and includes things like clausal subjects, where the subject itself is a clause, clausal complements, where a clause functions as an object, and open clausal complements, which are clausal complements that don't have their own subjects. There is only one dependency type where a clause acts as a non-core dependent of a clausal predicate, and that's the adverbial clause. There is also only one dependency type where a clause acts as a dependent of a nominal, and that's the adjectival clause. Moving further onward to the right, modifier words don't ever act as core arguments of clausal predicates, but they do sometimes act as non-core dependents of clausal predicates. This group of dependency relations includes adverbial modifiers and discourse elements. Discourse elements are just things like interjections, fillers, and things like well or you know. Modifier words can also act as dependents of nominals, and an example of this would be an adjectival modifier. Moving to the rightmost category, function words also don't act as core arguments of clausal predicates, but they can act as non-core dependents of clausal predicates. Auxiliaries express things like tense, mood, aspect, or voice, so things like has eaten, had eaten, etc. Copulas link subjects to nonverbal predicates, so they're generally to be verbs. And markers just mark clauses as subordinate to other clauses. Finally, in the bottom right corner of the table, we have function words that act as dependents of nominals. These are pretty useful, albeit perhaps unexciting, dependency relations like determiners and case marking elements, generally things like prepositions.